just turn it up.
Actually, this is the way things work. I'm not kidding about that. I wrote an article in Miracles magazine, and by the way, real quick announcement, if you'd like to subscribe, you can get it for half price if you do it today. Now, that's done. Actually, we are opening Miracles magazine to articles on A Course of Love, so it's sort of, see, that's a dual right there, right? We got two possibilities, and there's more than two possibilities. There's a section in A Course in Miracles which talks about the attraction of guilt and the attraction of God. These are like two major poles that we have in life. The Course in Miracles says that all there is one mind. There's really only one experience. And that experience, as we have just seen and heard, the universal experience is an experience of love. And insofar as we know what that's about, we know that that is a deeply fulfilling experience for us. But I wasn't kidding about the off-on part, because how do computers work? They work with zeros and ones, right? So everything is off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, right? The thing is to get the flow going, to get the balance going, to get back to oneness. Our friend Mark Greenberg says this happens so fast, it happens billions of times a second. I can't even imagine billions of times a second. But it has to work at that speed in order for information to be conveyed, right? So here we are. What we're doing here is we're learning about these two wonderful books which convey a message for us. The message is a very simple message. I'm here, I love you, you're a part of the love. Just all you got to do is remember me, come back home again, don't wander off into this illusion, don't get caught up in this dream. That's the attraction of guilt. The attraction of guilt is literally an attraction. It pulls us into the body, it pulls us into anger, it pulls us into attack, it pulls us into overeating, it pulls us into addictions, and you can't help but feel guilty when you go that way. The whole Course is, in Miracles now, is really about guilt. It's about overcoming guilt. It's getting beyond the guilt. I love it that it's the Center for Mystical Studies that has brought us all together, because mysticism is this attraction for God, is the pull of God, and we're constantly also being pulled. So a mystic is really, in that some sense, someone who is being seduced by the love of God. I mean, they're literally being pulled, constantly pulled into it, so that they're giving up on this other kind of addiction, the separated addiction. It's a funny thing. We had a meeting this morning for brunch. A group of us are talking about, and it was wonderful that Glenn made this possible for us to be able to sit and talk in an informal kind of way. People are talking about the differences between A Course in Miracles and A Course in Love. And I've been studying both of them now, having spent most of my life, 43 years studying A Course in Miracles. And the more I study the Course of Love, the more I realize that there aren't any real differences, because there aren't any real differences between us, because love is one, God is one. We are quite literally of one mind, yet it appears as though we are separate. So that's the off-on. The off-on is that there's a relationship between the two of us, right? If there wasn't the relationship, and as I said yesterday, there's a line from the Course where it says, divine abstraction is another name for God takes joy in sharing. So it's the sharing that really matters, and it really makes this whole experience worthwhile. But we have to learn. Yesterday, I talked a little bit about the the way that the ego uses the body, and I referred to it as an app, and if you were here, you remember, I won't go into it, but just to review quickly, the Course says the ego uses the body for attack, for pleasure, and for pride. I didn't talk about how the Holy Spirit uses the body, and 3 people have asked me, please talk about how the Holy Spirit. Let's have the other side of this thing as well. So let me do that in answer to the people who asked that I answer that question. So the way the Holy Spirit uses us is that, and there's no acronym for this, like there's an acronym for app. We don't have an acronym, but the initials are LCFH. Okay, so just this is a way to remember what I'm talking about here. We're here to learn. The Course says the body is a learning mechanism. This is a tool for learning. Right, so if this is a tool for learning, then I want to keep this tool working. Well, my father was a tool man. By a tool man, I meant the tools were always clean and they were always put in their place. They were hung up, and no shovel was used that didn't get washed and oiled before it was put back in shape. There's another tool man, Dr. Rod Selberg, sitting there, understands what I'm talking about. But the body is a tool. So it's how we take care of the tool that helps in a great deal in terms of beginning. If we're all like radios, is another way that we could talk about it. So these ladies, Mari and others, have become receptors, and they're very good at receiving information which we can now share in a very loving kind of way. Well, we all are. It's just that they've learned how to tune in a very specific way to get all this information, and that was true for Helen as well. Helen knew how to shut down the ego function, although it was still a very active part of her life, but she could shut it off, like a radio. She could shut it off and then begin to hear God's voice speaking through her, as Lesson 49 says, all through the day, quite literally all through the day. So we're learning how to listen, and we have these wonderful books which contain these words that gives us the clues on how to do it. So we need things like A Course in Miracles, because it is a Jnana Yoga, it is of the mind, it is showing us. So we begin to put the pieces together, we begin to have aha experiences ourselves, and those aha experiences are teaching us how to live. But we need to be repeated. Oh, the Course keeps saying the same thing. Oh, well, so does A Course of Love. It just keeps saying the same thing over and over and over again, because we're very dense. I mean, it really takes a lot for us to be able to begin to get this in, but we do get it. And the way that we get it very often, it's through, as Mary was saying, it's really through an experience. It's the experience of God. The Course in Miracles says, someone said yesterday, a universal theology is impossible. But a universal experience, that's what we call mysticism. A universal experience is not only possible but necessary. So we need to have, in order to have that experience, we have to make ourselves available to the experience. So this is a learning device. Whatever we're doing, whether it's reading or whatever it is that we're doing, to learn. LCH, and the C is communication. That's what we're doing right now. Why do we have conferences? Why do we have workshops? Why do we call everybody together to say we talk, we read, we communicate? This is the communication medium. The Holy Spirit communicates with us. Doesn't always work in terms of words, but it works in terms of experience, which opens the heart. Your experience is a profound opening of the heart. Actually, we know, because the statistics studies have been done to show how people come to have mystical experiences. And actually, it's more people wake up through crash and burn experiences than in any other way. I mean, it'd be nice if we could just have an opening, but it doesn't happen exactly that way. There's something that has to happen, that some tragedy, unfortunately, that really makes us stop. You got to get to stop. That's the most important thing. Because the ego is always chattering and always going on. It's just running the show all the time, and it never stops. You've got to... I wrote an article, one of the books back there is called A Course in Miracles and ... It's an anthology of articles which were originally in Miracles magazine. I only wrote the introduction and the chapter on Zen Buddhism. And the reason I wrote the chapter on Zen, and by the way, I had a Zen Buddhist proof of the chapter before I printed it, to be 100% sure that I had this right. What you have to do is you got to get back to stop. I mean, that's one of the reasons for meditation. We got to get back to the point of stopping the mind, stopping the insanity, stopping the projection, before you can see. You cannot be a projector and a receptor at the same time. We're learning how to become receptors to the voice of the Holy Spirit so that we can hear that as a guide through life, rather than allowing this insane ego to be the primary guide that so much of the world follows and that we have followed ourselves. But we know that that doesn't work, because the ego always runs into a ditch. By that I mean, by the way, don't be afraid of egos in the sense that, and this is an important point, all egos always implode. They have a built-in destruct mechanism, and it may take a while for that mechanism to destruct, but it will. All dictators fail. It always happens. They always come to tragic ends. Sometimes they make terrible messes before it gets to that point, but it will get to that point, right? But we can get to that point of just stopping the mind and becoming receptive to the guidance of God very simply by studying, by listening. So LC, communication. Communication is what's important. If a couple want to heal a relationship, they have to have communication going on, right? They have to be able to talk to each other to get back to where we're going with this. So it's the communication that becomes the important thing. But eventually, again, we're going to be transcending words. Because eventually, as we talked about, words actually in the long run, of course, as God does not understand words, right? Because it's not God's communication with us doesn't happen with, sometimes it seems to get reduced down to words. But it doesn't have to be that way, because real communication, as Course of Love is telling us, is happening with the level of the heart, right? And the heart doesn't have words. And I look at my wife and I say, I love you, and I think, that is so inadequate. Okay, I love you a lot. Okay, I love you very much. It's not working. I write a poem, that's a little bit better. Still not it. Better, but not all the way there yet. And because it transcends all that. It becomes a feeling which it's, I left a little note on the mirror in the bathroom before I left to come here for the weekend, and all it said was, I love you more every day. And, out there, right? Which is true. It's just, if you keep falling in love. But what happens with the mystic keeps falling in love with God. And you can't help falling in love with God with falling in love with everybody. Because how are you going to love God if you can't love each other, right? It's not just that, but in seeing the love in the people that we have trouble with, that's the particularly important element, right? And you can do that too. So, LC, communication, is the way we do this. F, forgiveness is the process by which this is done. And forgiveness is really very simple. It just means you let it go. How simple can you put let it go? Whatever you think that you think this is important. You think it's important that you have this anger, that you have attack thoughts. You think hate is the right kind of a thing. I was talking to somebody recently, and she just was talking about somebody else, and she was just so rude to me. That's really interesting. Why are you into the rude part? Watch the words, right? Projection makes perception, and she was getting caught in the fact her ego was caught in somebody being rude. Well, forget about it. The sooner you can let that go, the better. There's no reason to get plugged into the fact that somebody was rude. It doesn't make any difference. People are rude. Big deal. Let it go. Yeah. Yes, why should it become my problem? That's the whole thing. Don't make a problem your problem, something that's exterior. So L, C, F, H. H is healing. This is all about healing. It's all about healing the mind. It's all about healing the heart. It's all about coming back home to God once again. So one of the things that I wanted to also work in briefly this morning, as we were talking this morning at breakfast, I said to Glenn, it's a conundrum. By a conundrum, I mean, when we get into the deeper levels of understanding the metaphysics of the course, both courses, we get to the point where it looks like that there are contradictions, but beyond the contradiction, there really isn't any kind of contradiction. When love prevails, it doesn't make any difference that there are differences. We sort of talked about that briefly yesterday. So I found this book laying on that back table back there that somebody wrote that I thought it had some interesting lines in it. Maybe I would share some of these. So this is what happens in mysticism, really. These are just the suggestions of what the mystical experiences are. What can never be lost can't be found. Mystics use the mind to go beyond the mind. God is the darkness behind the light. God is not material, but is visible in everything. Mysticism is the undoing, or the undoing of doing. You must close your eyes in order to see. Matter does not matter. While consciousness is something and nothing, being is being without being. Mysticism is the static as well as the dynamic. The stillness is dancing. The passivity at which mystic aims is a state of intense activity. Of myself I can do nothing is to say, this is from A Course in Miracles, to say of myself I can do nothing is to gain all power. To lose oneself is to find oneself. What you are seeking is seeking you. The best way to get somewhere is to let go of the need to be anywhere. Mystics enjoy true liberty in proportion to the things they can leave alone. Or what do you lose when you lose an illusion? So all of these are just like the paradoxes of this experience we call life. But love transcends all paradoxes, right? We just know. The Course talks about the difference between perception and knowledge. But it's really hard to talk about knowledge. I mean, it's really hard to talk about what knowledge is. One of the basic characteristics of a mystical experience is called the noetic quality. And another basic characteristic is ineffability. So we have this knowledge, we know, but trying to put this into words is very difficult. But we can talk about it as an experience. So I'm going to tell you about a couple of experiences, and then I just want to be sure of my time. I got 6 minutes. Okay. I want to tell you about a couple of experiences, that not that I had, but that some people have told me about their mystical experiences. Where the Course is going, where all of this is going, of course, is back to home, to God again, which we understand God is one, God is whole, God is complete, and you are a part of this oneness, this wholeness. And whenever we have an experience of feeling a part of this oneness, whether it's in nature, whether it's with music, whether it's falling in, when you fall in love, you become one with the beloved, right? You want to just do things, you want to give to the beloved. We said that yesterday. Okay, so I was giving a lecture on mysticism in Arcadia, California a few years ago, and somebody walked up to me after I'd given the talk, and he said, "You know, I play in the Hollywood Symphony Orchestra." And he says, "There's this most wonderful thing that can happen when you're playing in a symphony orchestra." Anybody play in an orchestra ever? He says, what happens is, when it's working perfectly, and you know it's working perfectly, you know everyone there is on note and in tune. You know that everyone knows that every other musician is on note and in tune. You know that the audience knows. You know that the conductor knows. He says you get these goosebumps that go over your entire body. And he says, you just know, there's no question about this. You're about to have this experience that's called a standing ovation. Right? So I told that story at another talk about what mysticism is. It's that experience of oneness. And a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, "I had the same experience." She said, except I was leading a dance troupe. And we were dancing on stage, and she says, "I don't know what it was about that night, but it was perfect. Every dancer was exactly where they were supposed to be at exactly the time that they were supposed to be. Everyone on point. Everyone was on point, right?" She said the orchestra, they were perfect. It was just all working out. And she knew that this was perfect. She said, we get to the end of the piece, and the dancers are not on mic. And they all have to stop in a certain kind of position, right? And she says, when they stopped, one of the dancers said, but only so the other dancers could hear, they were kind of turned away from the audience, "Did you feel that? Did you feel that?" It's a feeling, right? But it's a feeling that we know that connects us with the whole. And that's where all of this is going, right? That's being home again. That's being back with God again. That's being complete. And when you get a poem, when something works perfectly well, that's the way it's supposed to be. And it can work that way all the time if we can just get out of it. Aldous Huxley once said, if you could get out of your not-self's light, you could be illumined. If you could stop anxiously cogitoing, you could give yourself a chance to be cogitoed. In other words, if you could stop anxiously thinking, you could give yourself a chance to be thought. Okay, so just to be thought, just to hear this. Well, Helen Schuckman had a way of getting out of her way. Mari's had a way of getting out of her way. And there are other ways, as I mentioned yesterday. Richard Allcamp is here on the back row. Today he is here. Gave me this book called From the Christ Mind. That's another way. You just hear it. It becomes so clear, and so thank God that it's given to these one, and then they share it. And because we share it and we read it, and we say, this is true. This has got to be true. Right? So you read the course, either one of the courses, and you think this is true. And then you fall in love with the Word. It's the Word that brings us to the light. My time is actually up. Joe, did you want to go straight to questions? Is that what you want to do?
Well, let's get John.
Oh.
Rearrange my stage here. Now, we have Mari and Mary kind of come up and we will just open it up for questions. It can be for Mary, John, but we do ask that you would use the microphone. Ken here has the microphone, so if you have a question, raise your hand, and Ken will give you a microphone. So we'll open it for questions now for anybody for our wonderful presentations. Okay, is there a question here? Oh, I thought I saw it. All right. Okay.
Everyone understands it. That's great.
It's that clear, right? It is, actually.
And we can also, as been kind of the theme of our time together, talk about the complementarity and the ways the courses work together. I think we've seen a lot of that even today. Stories we've heard that were shared and the way John puts it in such perspective and how it all comes back to the feeling. You were talking about the symphony, how it at a certain point is just perfect. And Mary shared that at one point it's like everything is perfect. And so even from different perspectives, you see, you get that mystical moment. So, I think we have a question back here. Retta, go ahead.
Yeah, peace and blessings. So my question is, I'm wondering about both of you, I'm curious about the rhythm of your studying this work that you've downloaded, both of you, and especially you, John, having had a long period of time to both study and teach. So I'm curious as to, I guess the big question is, what are the passages that really are moving you now? Like, what are you studying in each of these works that has your heart or has your curiosity or that you're grappling with? And the other question is around cycles. Do you find that you read certain things at a certain point? Have you noticed any cycles in the way you study the work?
Here's my address.
I think she...
Huh? Well, first of all, I had the good fortune of being a minister for a very long time, still am, but not in the formal context of a church as we talked about last night. And it's a wonderful job from the standpoint of, is our pastor still here? Yeah. It's a wonderful job in the sense that I can't see you very well, so I'm moving over here. There we go, thank you. You're put into this position where you have to sit down once a week and put your thoughts together in a meaningful way that you can hopefully communicate to other people and they will understand it and get some inspiration from it. What a job! You're forced into this kind of situation. And of course, the things that I like to work on were the things, either the problems that people were bringing me, or that there's always something cooking. Writing is an alchemical process. It's a cooking. You bring pieces in, you mix it together, you take stuff out, that's called editing. you throw more in, you stir it around a little bit, you keep doing that whole process. But the good part about it is that it never ends. And it never ends for you either. I mean, everybody is cooking. I mean, we're working on ideas all the time. And we're sharing them, and hopefully you're getting somewhere. We have the great privilege of being able to try to put these things into a meaningful context. Actually, the way the Miracles magazine got started, real quickly, I'll share this and then get married. Miracles magazine got started when I was a member of my church some 33 years ago, was moving, and he came to me and he said, I know that you write out your sermons. I don't read them, but I would write them out in detail. And he said, if I gave you $1 a week, would you be willing to make a Xerox of that and put a stamp on an envelope and mail it to me? And I said, sure, I can do that, if you don't mind some of the errors. And well, I could do that. I could send one to my mom and to my sister, and that. Now, if anybody else wants to, they're going to have to give me $1 a week as well. Well, that's literally, it just kept growing. I started adding poetry and seasonal activities and stuff that was going on. But it's a wonderful, we're all always cooking. We just have the privilege. And I don't know about Mari, but early in the morning is really the best time. Really early, before our daughter would go to school. I mean, really, the first couple of hours of the day before the phone begins to ring, that's read a little bit of the Course in Miracles, and I don't have to go to any particular. I just whatever I'm working on, then I go to the index and find out what the Course says about that. Or now I'm going to the index of A Course of Love as well. Mari.
I realize I was so excited to have my friend Mary join me and speak that I didn't share with you the reading between 19 and 20 that, and if you can stand it, I'd like to do that, because I finished chapter 19 and then you can't go on with your thinking mind. And this is kind of the way, to me, these passages work, is something happens, you don't realize it, and then a year later you realize it. It's sort of like, I'm going to share just real briefly, because these are beautiful passages in two different ways. So chapter 19 is sort of like an ending chapter. It's called Oneness and Duality. This chapter is included in it. Out of the deepest, darkest chaos of your mind comes the possibility of light. It is a bit like traveling backward, or the review of life that some experience after death. In order to remember unity, you must, in a sense, travel back to it, undoing as you go all you have learned since last you knew it, so all that remains is love. This undoing, or atonement, has begun, and once begun is unstoppable, and thus inevitably accomplished. I say words wrong all the time. You don't realize it until you start doing an audio book, and it's like when your publisher says, it's not Harbinger, it's or whatever it is. There's things like that. But this, I think that is an incredibly, incredibly powerful paragraph. Out of the deepest, darkest chaos of your mind comes the possibility of light. But I would receive this thing, and then it would sort of come into me and be gone. So I sit down then to get the next words from Jesus. I'm not remembering what I got before. So imagine my surprise when, after 10 weeks of hearing you can't go on with your thinking mind, what follows but the chapter on the embrace, which is everybody's favorite chapter. So it's like I believe you get these messages like, this out of the deepest, darkest chaos, and it does something to you. Somehow that passage led me to this place of I couldn't go on with my thinking mind. And then what follows is the heart speaking. The embrace. Your longing now has reached a fever pitch, a burning in your heart quite different than that which you have felt before. Your heart may even feel as if it is stretching outward, straining heavenward, near to bursting with its desire for union. A desire you do not understand but can surely feel. I could go on and on. This is such a beautiful chapter, but it's that whole now we've fallen into the embrace. And so I meant to kind of tie that together, letting go of the thinking mind, and then you're going to experience more and more fully that presence of the heart. Yes, you're going to feel that embrace. And like John was saying, it's like you don't know what these feelings are. often. And you try to bring them out, and you try to express them. But they're sort of unknown until they become known. Maybe a year later. So.
I think you first, so
John, you had mentioned that one of the Holy Spirit apps was Stop. And Maury, if I recall correctly, you were being told to stop thinking. And I'm wondering if both of you could tell us whether meditation is one way to help stop.
Sure. Well, in the simplest form, yes, that's always true, right? In Buddhism, the idea is to get back to non-conceptualization, back to a 0 point, actually to the point that there's no thought at all. Because it's not till we kind of clean house, that's the purification process of the Course in Miracles is talking about. It's not till we get all the junk out of there that we can begin to build back to having the right information come our way. But you cannot be projective and receptive at the same time. I said that a moment ago, right? So, but there's other ways too. I mean, sometimes you come to stop without intending to come to stop. And there's sometimes that you can meditate without intending to meditate. I had a friend, Dr. John Lilly, he called driving the American mode of meditation. Now, it could also be the American mode of ego obsession. It's just depending on which mind that you're willing to entertain at the time, but actually you can drive a car and meditate at the same time. You just have to be very aware of your surroundings. That's that's the same thing. If you're very aware of your surrounding, that's all that really is called for. Of course you want to go, but crashing and burning also causes you to stop. When you get down, I mean that's an absolute stop. All right. Can you address this?
I just had one thought, and I probably can't express it real well, but I believe one of the really new things and really revolutionary things about A Course of Love, at least the way it tells us, it's like, I think some of it, at least I know I took A Course in Miracles in like I was receiving manna from heaven, I just couldn't stop reading it. But I think when it does talk a lot about study and this and that in A Course in Miracles. And A Course of Love goes in the reverse direction. It says, don't do that. Don't use your mind. Don't study. And there's been some recent scientific studies. They started, and I have a horrible memory, which is, anyway, but I was reading about this in a book on centering prayer, because I'm a centering prayer practitioner. And so they've been studying like the Buddhists and people who do other sort of intentional meditations, and have only begun to study those who do centering prayer, which is more a meditation of the heart, and it's not an intentional meditation. And if I can express this somewhat correctly, and I think I have somebody here who might know, it was talking about how the intentional, it fires those parts of the brain that are still based on survival. But the unintentional draws on the hippocampus, is that correct? Okay, and so it's that deeper place of a more original knowing and a deeper sense of identity. And so I think the movement away from, the thinking and the learning kind of goes together with the awakening of a deeper creative state, mystical states and that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. John, I know you, like myself, I'm a student of Carl Jung, and we think of the collective consciousness. The beauty of ACOL and ACIM is how much we can get in touch with our own awakening process on an individual level, as Mary so well demonstrated today in her own journey. When we look at the collective and the world, we can go back to when Socrates was in Athens and what he did to awaken consciousness on a collective level. And we can look at history and how a lot of philosophers would say that consciousness is like going up a down escalator. You can go up faster, and the collective consciousness can increase even more, so that collectively we are more awakened. And then also it can go backwards to where consciousness goes in reverse place, where we get more into the ego. So in this spectrum of the spirit thought system and the ego thought system as an example of collective consciousness, do you have opinions as to, given the world state as we see it today, and the world that we've seen in our own knowledges of history, where we may or may not be, given that all minds are joined and the contagiousness of thought that we experience all the time, and what your own opinions are around the consciousness of light versus dark, and what's happening in that world today and where it's going?
That's a lot of questions.
You want to do it?
I can do a little bit.
You do a little bit.
Yeah. What came to me right away when talking about the state of the world today is where Jesus talks in A Course of Love about. No, I'm going to forget. But it's sort of that when you don't know who you are, it's the seeing of illusion. It's the seeing of illusion happening. So there is this. Christina, do you know what I'm looking for? Anybody in the crowd? Oh gosh, I say it all the time and now it's gone. But anyway, you see it demonstrated. You see it demonstrated. And this gives you a realization of something that's going on in the world. And I think we're seeing demonstrated the ego. We're seeing an ego identity accentuated in a way that may very well help us leave our ego identities behind. So that's one way that I would think of it. And you had so many other questions in there. There was something else, but go ahead, John.
Well, obviously there's always this again, the off-on, the regression and progression. And so we fall back in some material way, for example, and then that helps to wake us up. We realize that money's not it, so we're going to move into spirit now. And then another thing will happen, regress, progress. But we always want to be, and I think we are. I said this yesterday. Spiritually speaking, we are growing. There's actually a fantastic growth process going on at the moment, which I said yesterday we see in terms of the death of the church is one example of it. But the need that we have to be thinking on our own, to be reasoning this through. That's not being told what spirituality is, but coming to discover it through these new writings, which in some ways are not new. They are new in terms of the level of sophistication with which we can now learn. For example, I once asked Ken Wapnick why he thought we got the Course in Miracles. Why did this come to us during the latter quarter of the 20th century? And he said he didn't know the answer to that for sure, but there was something he was sure of, and that is we could not have gotten it until after Freud, because it wasn't until Freud that we had a really clear ego psychology. So Freud understood this ego thing, but Freud had a problem in that he was an atheist. So he didn't see a way out. There was no door. There was no exit. Well, if he'd have studied Eastern philosophy, maybe they'd realize that there was an exit. But now Helen was a Freudian. It was no accident. It was Helen that received this material because she understood how the psyche worked so clearly. And understanding how it works, she could then put it into this new context through the voice of Jesus, but using psychological language. Because if the Course in Miracles had appeared during the middle of the 19th century, people would have gone, huh? I mean, there may be a few that would have got it, but they wouldn't have been ready for it. until as we are ready for it now. And that process is going to keep going as a process. But I wouldn't be surprised if we don't keep falling back and then moving forward and falling back and moving forward as we progress through this whole process, right? We're not nearly as, in some ways, as cruel and mean and destructive as before, but we have the potential for it in a more powerful way than ever before, right? There was a hand over here. You want to give a mic to Mike?
Yes, we have a collective consciousness thing here. Yes.
You got a passage?
Yeah. And I thank you very much. And also I want to say kind of what Mary and I have been experiencing as part of the collective consciousness. And you find it all the time, with people that I have a lot of people I only know by email. And yet then you meet them and it's like you're yearning for the same thing at the same time. You're yearning for a certain kind of expression. You're yearning for a certain kind of creativity. You're yearning for connection. Those kinds of things are always going on. And I do think we're in a very heightened time of collective consciousness. I read a quote yesterday from the treatise on the New, where Jesus says, those born into the time of Christ, they want to learn directly. They don't want anybody to tell them what to do. We used to want to fit in and be, like other people, and the kids coming out now want to be original. They want to be unique. That's the most important thing to them. And we're all kind of moving towards being our original selves. So I think that's a very exciting, heightened time, which I might have talked too long and let your quote go off here. I'm sorry.
No problem. You want to take a picture of people?
For those who weren't here yesterday, this is Colin Strutt, who created our concordance for A Course of Love. And my dear friend, his wife Christina, provided this quote on Christ consciousness. Because we are one heart, one mind, one self, we can only know ourselves through sharing in unity and relationship. We could only share in unity and relationship through a seeming separation from the oneness in which we exist. This is the great paradox that unites the world of form and the world of spirit, the world of separation with the world of union, even while it does not unite the world of illusion and the world of truth. Sharing in unity and relationship is the way and the means past the world of illusion to the truth of the union of form and spirit, separate selves, and the one self. And just this being passed to me is a demonstration. Thank you.
Ellen, you have one gentleman over here, and then we'll kind of begin to wrap it up. Go ahead.
Thank you. This question might be for Mary, and maybe you already answered it, Maury, I'm not sure. But I'm interested in becoming available to what's hidden within me. Do you have any, tips about that?
What can it be?
Thank you, Elliot. For me, it was so hidden that I had no idea it was there until I opened myself up. I believe that Jesus was so close to me during this time that my union involved bringing what I didn't know was within me out. That I needed light, I was ready for light, I was going to go the whole 9 yards for light. And that meant risking, taking a chance. And I feel, I don't know if the word reward is right, but the gift of taking a chance like that was tremendous for me. I cannot say enough about A Course in Miracles and A Course of Love. For me, there's just gratitude. But I would be very aware of something. For instance, I have clues right now of why it was very hard for me to join things. I was afraid. I needed to protect myself. It took my husband 3 times to ask me to marry him before I did. I wouldn't even go, after this attack, I met him. And I said, you're a nice guy, but this has happened to me and I just can't go out with you. Well, he kept knocking at my door. And finally I said yes. And maybe that was one of the first chances I took about trust and my hiddenness. But I wanted you to see that there was a pattern in my life about why these things happened. And once that veil was lifted, it was all systems go. Now, I could not lift that veil alone. You do not do this alone. So if you can, I don't want to say get down on your knees and pray, but my prayer was internal. I needed something so desperately, and it was heard. I want to tell you one thing that I forgot. When I began A Course of Love, I was very hesitant about accepting Jesus. As a child I had. But I had this fear, this hidden fear that I couldn't express, and unknowingly at that point. And finally, and Jesus, it was like, just accept me, there is no fear. And so finally I began a dialogue with Jesus. And I said, Jesus, you don't know me. I mean, of course he knows me, but you have to understand what I've gone through. And he said to me in this dialogue, Mary, go back to the attack. So this is on the computer, I'm writing, and I told what happened. Now, I had faulted myself for even being attacked for some reason. Did I not latch the window? What went wrong? I don't know what was going on. So 3 times I had to tell him the story of that attack. And remember when I said the words to the fellow that was doing this to me, I said, do you promise? And Jesus said back to me, this is in the midst of reading A Course of Love, he said, this is one of the first times this man ever kept his word, ever kept his promise, and it was to you. I thought of John. I don't know why, but there was some connection with something you said yesterday, and it was so powerful to me to revisit this wound that I had gone subterranean with. I went back to work, I went back to school, I did it all, but something had frozen in me that needed to be thawed out, and the only way was love. So I cannot tell you how valuable this is, and I can't speak for everyone, but there's a possibility others have had things that have remained locked within, and I cannot tell you, I can tell you, I can tell you that it's possible. And if you need to call me or write to me, my door is always open, Elliot. I have to tell you, this morning at the breakfast, Elliot read a poem. And he read this most beautiful poem. And I thought I was still uncertain about what I would speak of. And it gave me so much courage. He stood in his truth. There he was. And I'm thinking, this is how connected we are. If Elliot can do it, I can go up there. His was poetry and musical, but I can stand in my truth and say, these are my wounds, this is my healing. Come be in my light with me. I'm all yours. I'm all yours. And so, that's it.
Thank you.
So I'd like to ask your thoughts about this, because we have been very privileged this weekend to be here to witness this potential collaboration. It's still the two courses. But so I'm wondering what advice would you give to a person who's done neither? Should they start with a Course in Miracles or a Course of Love? I'm asking that because I think it's important. There are people that haven't done either. And in fact, what advice would you give to people who have done a Course in Miracles that are leaving that to do a Course of Love? And that's something that came to me yesterday. Somebody I met here that used to be part of a group in New York, she stopped reading A Course in Miracles to go to A Course of Love. So I want to present one thing that my partner said to me yesterday. He said, well, what are you doing there? I said, well, it's Course in Miracles and A Course of Love. He said, oh, the miracle of love. So that I thought was profound, and he knows nothing about this. So with that in mind, do you see that type of collaboration? Will the courses ever become just the course?
No.
Or a commentary by both of you, that a summation of aggregating the material?
I don't know that the course will ever become the course. I mean, they are distinct units, but they are obviously complementary, even though there's some places that we are still trying to polish and to be clear about of some kind of maybe difference, but I think it's doesn't make a difference. I said yesterday that what really interests me, and I know it's true for Joe too, and so many others, is what the Course in Miracles calls the universal course. Because there is a universal course, of which these are both parts, and is transcended. In the book that Richard Alcombe gave me, From the Christ Mind, that's a part of it too, in Way of Mastery. We said this yesterday, and so many others. My primary interest over the course of years has been studying mysticism. Well, read Rumi. Okay, so Rumi was written during the 13th century. His exact dates are 1207 to 1273. You're reading the Course in Miracles when you read Rumi. It's
or Hafiz, for that matter. Or Hafiz.
Oh yeah, or Hafiz. Yes, yeah. I mean, or many of them. It's and that's in my latest book, A Course in Mysticism and Miracles. What I do is I compare the insights of about 200 different mystics with the teachings of A Course in Miracles. And so it's just a really kind of a way of saying, well, yeah, but this has already been said before. What's different is the packaging. And the package, as I said, the Course in Miracles couldn't have come until after Freud. So psychologically, it's incredibly sophisticated. Right? And now we have another sophisticated book from the 20th and 21st centuries. So that's what makes it exciting, that we're just seeing the same thing. It's the universal course. I think it's interesting to look for the characteristics, but we don't have time to talk about what those characteristics are. Like non-dualism, love, eternity, you can run down a list, indelibility, etc.
Okay, folks, we're looking at things at the core from two different points of view.
Yeah.
And I'm going to illustrate this with gender. I'm not gender biased, it's just useful right now. Roll with me. John is going from A Course in Miracles, which I got a hold of in 1980 and saved my ass, comes from changing our thoughts and our belief systems. Yours comes from the gut, the heart, the emotional center. It is like the two parts of the Star of David or the Seal of Solomon. They come from different places, but they end up on top of the same information. And it doesn't really make a damn bit of difference where you start. You're going to get to the center, to the nut, to the kernel.
Yeah.
End of story.
That was very well said. Thank you very much.